Hi, everybody. Our lecture today is about Hinduism. We're going to introduce some of the main teachings and texts of Hinduism. As you'll have seen in our reading, also the history is covered and the question of Hinduism as a way of life. So I refer you to those pages for some guidance there. Here, I just want to walk through the kind of core ideas that might not be immediately clear and try to offer some supplementary explanation. So let's get started. Hinduism is the first of the traditions that we're going to study in this course, and it is, in a certain way, exceptional for reasons that we'll go into. It's a highly diverse tradition. It's a tradition focused on the presence of what we can call the divine, of what in the West we're accustomed to calling God, but within Hinduism, as you may know already, and will learn from the reading, there is a multitude of divinities, of gods. Here we have a depiction of some of those and also an indication of the rich color and artwork and the importance of image and of the senses as a way of connecting with the divine. We'll see more about that as well in the documentary that you will watch. I've said already that Hinduism is a highly diverse religion, raising the question for us really, what is a religion? I mean, that of course is a question we talked about last week and a very complicated one. But more simply, where do you draw the lines around practices, beliefs, texts, cultural customs, and call it a single religion? Many people are convinced, I think rightly, that Hinduism is better regarded as the religions of India. Right? The religion means religio. It comes from the Latin word religio, meaning most agree to bind. Right? So you're binding, you're connecting yourself with something higher, with what we would call the divine. And there are many ways of doing that within what we call Hinduism. The word Hinduism was first used, Hinduism, the full phrase, or the full word, in the 1830s by the British, who were at that time moving into India with certain economic and political intentions that are discussed in the text that I certainly encourage you to read closely. There's no single founder of Hinduism. There's no single leader of Hinduism. There's no single official structure. You can't go to the head office of Hinduism. It's more of a space in which a wide variety of traditions, different kinds and degrees of authority among teachers, a space in which that has developed. One way to distinguish between Hinduism and traditions with which we might be more familiar, Judaism, Christianity, Islam, in our part of the world, is to point out that Hinduism is more focused on right practice than on right belief. More focused on right practice than on right belief. It's not a question of, belief is important, but it's not a litmus test for determining whether you are a Hindu, right? So you could say, in the case of Christianity, that if a person does not believe that Jesus ever existed, or does not believe that Jesus is divine in some way, or does not believe in God, well, that person, because of those beliefs, is not Christian. In the case of Hinduism, it's less clear. The focus is more on what you do during your life and whether, as you'll see, we follow certain practices. And to do so is good karma, and to not do so is bad, but I anticipate. A lot of practices associated with Hinduism are now common in the West. The widespread acceptance of vegetarianism in the West has been traced to Hinduism. Yoga, of course, has become a really popular and for many people an important practice in various ways, more and less religious, but that also draws on Hindu traditions. And of course, I've already mentioned the belief in karma. I've put up on the slide here, and if you have a big enough screen, I encourage you to enlarge it. This is a portion of the timeline provided in our text, tracing the actual years that we're talking about here. BCE, of course, refers to before the Common Era. We start off in around 2600 BCE with the Indus Valley Civilization. And then by about 1200 BCE, we have actual writing down of one of the core texts of Hinduism, the Rig Veda. Other Vedas are composed thereafter, and by about the first century CE, so that's the Common Era, we see the Bhagavad Gita, which we're going to spend a little special time on at the end of my remarks here, and which by many is seen as the central text in a practical way of Hinduism. What does Hinduism believe about God, gods, and the divine? Well, let's begin with that. The essence of the cosmos, I've put on the slide here, the absolute, is called Brahman. Brahman. Everything is Brahman. Brahman is the matter, the clay, the stuff out of which all things are composed. Brahman is not personal. Brahman is not conscious. You can't talk to Brahman, right? It is reality itself. Now, within Hinduism, our text does a good job of highlighting two streams, and these are overlapping streams. One of them is called monistic, and the other polytheistic. Right? So modism comes from the root, what would it be, a prefix? The root mono, right? One. Uh, all things are one. If I'm a monist, I believe that everything that I see, the many, right? You, me, the slide, the screen, all of those things are actually manifestations of only one thing, right? And in fact, the way in which different things appear as different, appear as many, is a kind of illusion. And you'll see this discussed in the text. The term for it within Hinduism is Maya, Maya, M-A-Y-A, right? So when I see you and I see me, I don't see you, but it would be nice if I did. But if I see you and I see me, I see two, right? And I think, oh, you are you, I am me. Hinduism doesn't deny that that has a certain truth to it, but on an ultimate level, it regards this as illusion, right? That we need to recognize our oneness with all things, and the basis of that oneness, the substratum, the foundation, is Brahma. Hinduism is also rightly characterized as polytheistic. So there are many gods within Hinduism. Poly means many. Theos in Greek means gods. So polytheos, polytheism is a belief in many gods. The gods within Hinduism are different from the God of Judaism or Christianity or Islam. They are not single, transcendent, omnipotent, omniscient beings. They are part of the whole panoply of life, from insects, bacteria, up to animals and human beings, up to the gods themselves. So you can think of the gods as part of this whole assembly of living creatures. The question for Hindus is how to access this divine reality, how to connect with this divine reality. Well, in a Christian context, we might talk about prayer, Christian, Muslim, Jewish context. Here, within Hinduism, there's a range of ways of connecting with God, as there is in any tradition, but it's really pronounced here. Sound, images, sacred places, these are discussed at some length in our text. I will focus on the case of sound. The image on the screen you see here is an image of the sound Aum in a script common in India. And the significance of this sound, if you think of it, Aum, so kind of three distinct sounds, Ah, U, right? When you put these together, the Ah is the first vowel sound in the relevant language. U is the last vowel sound, and is the last consonant sound. So Aum expresses, as it were, in one noise, all of spoken language, all of the verbal means by which we give expression to our relationship with and connection to the divine. And so often you'll see people chanting this, or you might even see it in a kind of parody context, people chanting Om, right? There's great depth to that. Gods can appear in various forms. This is referred to by the word avatar. The word avatar itself literally means a descent of the god into some physical form. Uh, Shiva and Brahma and Vishnu, for example, three of the most important gods, about whom we'll say more in a minute, um, take on different avatars and thus play a role in all of the epics and texts and scriptures of the Hindu tradition, far beyond just in their, as it were, original form. They can appear in many different guises. Speaking of these three, triple gods, so called, the term for this is the Trimurti. I referred to Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva, who are respectively the creator of the world, the preserver of the world, and the destroyer, or as our text has it, the dissolver, brings the world to an end. It's important to distinguish here between Brahman with the lowercase b and an n at the end. That is the substance of all things. And Brahma, who is the creator God of this especially important triumvirate of gods among the thousands, indeed perhaps millions of gods recognized within what we call Hinduism. At the center of Hinduism, there is a project, a bit of a problem, right? The idea is this. All individual beings are part of Brahman. We've said that, right? And we've said that there's no actual distinction ultimately between us. That's the insight that we are called to acquire. Each being is said to have within itself an Atman, right? Atman means soul. So my soul is that which moves from life to life through a process of reincarnation. People, animals, gods, they all have an Atman, right? Um, your conduct during your life is referred to as your karma, and your karma determines where you are reborn in what is called the round of birth and death, which we've taken as a title for this slide, and I've depicted as an image um, over there. Of course, it's very small, you can't see it very well, but on that image, we have a kind of wheel, and this will be very important in Buddhism as well. In fact, the idea is the same. And on that wheel, we have depicted different places, different stages of life, different forms of life, different ways in which an Atman can be reborn, either in a, as it were, higher form or a lower form, depending on one's karma. Higher here means that one is closer, in fact, to or has conditions better to achieve release from this round of birth and death. And that is the goal. In fact, one does not want to remain forever within samsara, within the round of birth and death. One wants liberation. How is one liberated? Well, one needs to engage in good karma, for starters, right? This includes good action as defined by the Vedas. We've referred to them already. These are the most important scriptures, the earliest scriptures within Hinduism. Also, it concerns following one's dharma. This is the first occurrence of what will be a very important word in our course. In this context, your dharma is what you are supposed to do, given who you are. I am a professor at present. I have a certain dharma. I have certain things that I am supposed to do, certain things I should do, ought to do, right? You are a student at present. There are certain things that you should do too. Thus, in this sense, our dharmas are different, they're distinct, right? But both of us have a certain duty. This includes right ritual, social, and ethical conduct. Now, how can you tell what your dharma is, right? What am I supposed to do? It's a pretty important question. Well, for one thing, it depends on your stage of life. What you are supposed to do when you're 14 and 24 and 44 is different. And these different stages of life are known as the four ashramas, discussed in the text. We'll say a bit more in a moment. It also concerns one's caste. And this is an issue, of course, that has had great importance in Indian culture, as you'll see from the reading. You may have heard of it already. There are four castes traditionally within the main part of the system. Each of these is known as a varna. One can move between castes, so one can be born as a lower caste, perform with very good karma, and then be reborn as a person of a higher caste. The goal of this whole system of people in samsara acquiring good karma by, acting according to their dharma. Okay, so we've used all the language now, right? The final goal is liberation from the round of birth and death, and we call this moksha in this tradition, release, right? So you no longer are reborn. You, as it were, cease to exist as an individual being. Why? Because you recognize, finally, and realize, actually, your unity with Brahman, with all things. The image here might be of a drop of water falling into a larger body of water, an ocean, river, stream, right? The drop of water doesn't float around like a fish or some other object. The drop of water joins with the larger stream of water and becomes one with it. This is the ultimate goal of this tradition. These are the four castes referred to and discussed in the reading. At the top are the Brahmins, priests, those who are concerned with matters intellectual. The Kshatriyas are kings, rulers, warriors. And the Vaishyas, merchants, craftsmen, landowners, skilled workers. You can read the slide. At the bottom of this main part of the caste system are the Shudras. These are workers or servants. And beneath all of the castes, and this is a matter of great political significance in India today, are the Dalits, the what are called the untouchables. Um, Gandhi himself, Mohandas Gandhi, whom you read about in the chapter, was a great critic of the existence of, and this is where we almost get the term, an underclass of people who don't even, human beings who don't even fall within that four part structure. This structure is outlined in some of the very earliest writings in Hinduism, and it is a matter of, as I say, great political importance, social importance in India today. A lot of people are challenging the caste system for, I suppose, reasons that'll be obvious. Whatever caste you belong to, you move through during your life a series of stages, and these are the stage of the student, stage of the householder, stage when you retire from your responsibilities, and the stage of what is called a renunciate, a sannyasa, a person who is devoting herself, himself entirely to the goal of achieving moksha, of achieving liberation. Um, to each of these stages, there pertain certain duties, different dharma for each stage, right? And then, of course, within that, there are lots of other categorizations that our authors go into. But the thing that I'd like to convey and for you to remember is that to be a human being, a person in Hindu society, brings with it a really thick sense of place, of who I am, when in life I am, right? How I relate to others. And your duty, that is how you acquire good karma and eventually achieve liberation or moksha, depends on all of those factors. Here we have an image of sannyasa, a person who has um, renounced uh, the duties of the householder, the student, the earlier stages of life, and is now devoting, in this case, himself entirely to the quest for liberation. Now, there are many ways to seek this path to liberation. Okay, I mean, we know that one wants to acquire good karma, but like on any journey, there are specific avenues, specific paths that one can follow. There are three paths highlighted in our text, and these are the three major paths. The word path translates the word marga. Sometimes these are also called yogas. And we'll refer to yoga here in a moment as well, but I think our authors choose to use the term marga to avoid confusion. The three are karma marga, bhakti marga, and jnana marga. Now, in a way, this is just some vocabulary for you, but think it through. Um, each of these focuses on a different kind of activity that can help you to progress on the way of acquiring good karma, following your dharma, and achieving liberation. Karma yoga, action, right? This is doing the right thing, being active in your community, right? Contributing to the improvement of the world. This is yoga focused on action. Uh, Bhakti yoga is focused on devotion. Maybe I'm not a very active person. Maybe that's not my disposition. Well, what I can do is focus more, and these certainly all three of them overlap, right? I can focus more on devotion to one or more of the deities, divinities in the Hindu pantheon. Pantheon is an assembly of all of the gods. And that devotion of the heart um, doesn't replace the need for right action, but it can be a path that speaks to me individually in a way that is more effective for me. The final one, Jnana Marga, insight, has to do with intellectual pursuits and meditation, contemplation, thinking, trying to come to realizations through study and thought. It's connected with the tradition, the main school of Hindu philosophy known as Vedanta. This is a fascinating area of literature from ancient times, very much up to the present. The word Vedanta means the end of the Vedas, which I would take to mean not only coming after the Vedas, but the purpose, the goal, the kind of essence of the Vedas. There are many different forms of Vedanta. The best known is called Advaita Vedanta, and that is a kind of philosophical reflection on what we started with, that each of us is an Atman, and at the same time, we are ultimately Brahman, right? There's a bit of a puzzle in that, right? Because clearly you and I are different in certain ways. You're there and I'm here to begin with, right? So that seems true to some extent. It's not sheer illusion. But if we make the further claim that we are actually ultimately the same thing, well, you got to kind of work that out just conceptually. What's going on there? That's what Advaita Vedanta especially focuses on, and it's joined by Dvaita Vedanta, which is Advaita means non-dualist and Dvaita means dualist. Obviously, there are distinctions here that go far beyond what we can cover in our lecture today. But it's important to know that these teachings are the subject of a massive literature project over centuries and indeed millennia to understand how they work and how they work conceptually. And this is characteristic of any religious tradition, including all the ones that we'll study in this course. Yes, there are certain texts, there are certain practices, and at the same time, there is invariably some group of people who are reflecting on the coherence of that and trying to understand it in a deeper and fuller way. The text also talks about yoga and emphasizes what are called there the five virtues: cleanliness, contentment, discipline, studiousness, and devotion to a God. Yoga means simply work. So there are different forms of work, different kinds of things you can do. Of course, in the West, we are familiar with yoga studios, and many of us may even have a yoga practice. We'll know from that practice that there are ways to approach it that are more athletic or recreational, and there are ways to approach it that are more religious, philosophical, spiritual, something like that, and certainly a spectrum between those two. And any practitioner of yoga in the West will determine for herself, what form that will take. Let's say a bit about texts. We're going to just mention the earlier ones here, and I want to conclude by talking a little bit about the Bhagavad Gita, book which, as I said earlier, has emerged as sort of the central text in practice within Hinduism. The Vedas, as we touched upon earlier, are divided into four main collections. They are the earliest Hindu scriptures. They concern the universe and creation, the nature of reality. They reach back several millennia, the Rig Veda being the earliest. These are followed by the Upanishads, which exhibits a shift of focus, not so much focused on just the nature of reality, but on the nature of human life and human engagements with that reality. For many Hindus, the Upanishads are seen as a kind of culmination of the Vedas. They bring together the message of those four much longer, older texts in a kind of consolidated form, conveying, we could say, their essence. Um, Other important texts within the tradition, among the several that are discussed in our text, are the Puranas, the Ramayana, and the Mahabharata. And these are epics, these are stories about kings and gods and other people, animals, monkeys, elephants, right? Uh, uh, Beings that interact with each other in these dramas that help those connected with this tradition imagine and narrate their own experience. For example, the text discusses the Ramayana, a really important epic work, and points out that the characters in that story are seen as kind of role models in the culture, right? This is what it is to be a husband. This is what it is to be a wife. This is what it is to be a helper, right, of someone else. So these stories define the cultural space of what we're calling Hinduism, just as other traditions have stories that define their space. These are the stories that children learn from early in life. Now, the last text I want to talk about is the Bhagavad Gita, and this is actually just one of many so-called songs in the text. Now, it's quite long. It's a certain, many dozens of pages, but the Mahabharata is extremely long, so this fits within that. Um, we'll go into the details about it in a moment, but it's enough to say for the moment here that when, especially the British, came to India, um, they asked the question that one might ask as a Christian of the 19th century: "What's your Bible? What's the book that I can put on a table, and that is the core of the teaching of your faith." And what emerged in response to that question is the Bhagavad Gita, especially loved by Gandhi. Here's an image of the four Vedas. And we can see here on the screen here we say mantra on the title page, mantras in Sanskrit with English translation and transliteration. Just a sidebar here. A mantra is discussed in the text. This is a phrase that one repeats verbally, right? Sanskrit is the language in which the Vedas were composed. It's the sacred language of Hinduism. And English translation will know, but transliteration is when you have a word in a different language and you don't translate it like, I don't know, biblioteca, library, right? Uh, Spanish and English words for library. You transliterate it. You just use the characters and letters of your own language to spell out what the word sounds like. So you're not translating the meaning, you're just translating the sound. So when we say we transliterate something, there are, for example, different transliterations of the Quran, right? So you see the holy book of Islam. So you see Quran sometimes Koran. You also see it Quran. It's not that one is correct or the other incorrect. They're just different ways of transliterating the word. A helpful distinction made in our text is between shruti and smriti. Shruti, that which is heard, I would hazard in a broad way, corresponds with what we think of in the West as revelation. These are texts that are, well, we have Samhitas, collections here, all of the Vedas are here, the Upanishads. These are texts that are given or received. It has been heard, right? Whereas the second category here, smriti, pertains to tradition. And this includes the epics, it includes the Bhagavad Gita, it includes the writings of great Hindu teachers throughout the ages. It's not to say that those are not important, but they're different in kind than the Vedas. You know, I mean, a well-known guru writes a book in the 19th century that's different than the Rig Veda, which is composed in 1200 BCE, right? So this is just a kind of map of the texts that make up the Hindu tradition or that inform it. All right, so I want to talk a little bit about the Bhagavad Gita. This is a bit of a case study. It's the most important holy book within Hinduism, but it's also an example, a clear illustration of the principles that we started with, the teachings from which we began. Here we have an image of Arjuna and an avatar of Krishna. So Arjuna is on the left, and this avatar of Krishna, who in the story is his charioteer, the person driving his chariot into battle as it happens. And that charioteer is an avatar of the god Krishna, the preserver, whom we met earlier. So, what is the Bhagavad Gita? We've said that there is no single holy book. We've seen some of the holy books, but the Bhagavad Gita is seen as a summary of all the scriptures. Some have called it the story of India itself, right? And so language can get kind of grand in contexts like this. The title itself means the song of God. And so Gita simply means song, and Bhagavad is a form of the word for God. And so there are many Gitas in Hindu scripture. When we say the Gita, we're just kind of recognizing that this is the most famous one, but there are actually many. So, what happens in this story? And we're going to have some selections from this next time, so you'll get to read a chunk of it. The Gita is set around 3200 BCE, so before any of the scriptures were written. We're looking back in time and imagining this scene. There's a war in India between two groups, the Kauravas and the Pandavas. Now, these two groups are not completely unrelated. In fact, they're basically cousins. They're members of the same family, but they oppose each other politically. And so these political differences are leading them literally into a battle. Like there's a battlefield, army here, army there, and they're going to fight and kill each other, even though they're family members, right? This battlefield is called Kuruksetra, and it's set during this war, and it opens the Bhagavad Gita in a compelling way. The armies are lined up, and they're ready to fight, and the battle is about to begin. Right, and here we have an image of Arjuna and Krishna. We've introduced these. Arjuna is the soldier. Krishna is the charioteer, avatar of Krishna. And Arjuna is paralyzed by doubt because he's about to charge into battle on his chariot and kill his family members. Now, you can imagine there are lots of reasons a person wouldn't want to do that, emotional reasons, personal reasons. Also because it seems like bad karma. I mean, killing your cousin is terrible karma. Killing anyone is bad karma, but especially killing a family member. And so Arjuna just doesn't know how to begin, right, to act. Krishna, this charioteer, basically turns around and says, "Hey, by the way, I'm not just your charioteer, I'm Krishna. Hello." And then they talk. And the book, the Bhagavad Gita, is the recounting of their conversation. Here we have an image of the armies. We have Krishna in Krishna's wisdom here with Arjuna looking up at Krishna for guidance, for solace. And here we have, spoiler, here we have what happens in the end. Arjuna, drawing an arrow, preparing to go into battle as he does at the end of the story. Krishna convinces him that he does need to engage in this battle. What is the main message of this, and how does Krishna convince Arjuna to engage in this battle with his own family members? The main message is, as I would put it, is that life and death are not permanent. They pass into each other. We are reincarnations almost to infinity. We're part of this large process. This process itself is just a manifestation of one thing, Brahman, right, at the bottom of all things. And we create these kind of artificial boundaries. And this is my family member. This is not my family member. Even in a way, this is right and this is wrong. Um, all of this is seen by Krishna as presented as um, relative in a certain way. That everything could be otherwise than it is, and yet it is as it is, right? So you act according, again, as we said earlier with the notion of karma, you act according, or of dharma, you act according to your duty, your station of life, your caste, your, specific relationships that you have. You do what your duty says. All these distinctions and truths, yes, they're kind of true, but they're not absolutely true. The problem is when you cling to those distinctions, like, but it's my family, right? Seemingly a very reasonable thing to say, but it's my family. When you cling to that, it leads you to kind of seize up, right? You can't go into battle. I mean, battle is a metaphor for life. Um, the goal, then, Krishna makes clear to Arjuna, is to do your duty, but to practice detachment from the fruits of your action. To practice detachment means that you don't get swept up into what you're doing, right? You don't lose yourself in it. You simply do what you know you have to do in that situation, and you're not attached to, you're not grasping after the results. If it succeeds, it succeeds. If it fails, it fails, and that's what was meant to be, right? And that was what detachment would mean here. You're not needing to have a certain result in order to have peace about what you do. So that is what I want to say about the Hindu tradition, friends. We've seen many concepts introduced, so I encourage you to go back and rewatch some of the portions if you find it helpful. And in class, we'll discuss not only some passages from this portion of the text, but also some of the issues that come up in the discussions of the history of Hinduism and of Hinduism as a way of life. So thank you very much for your attention.